Director Karyn Kusama made her debut with Girl Fight, a tough girl indie drama with attitude. It was clear right off the bat that Kusama had something to say. Hollywood thought so too, handing her the reins on a strange and risky project, Aeon Flux. The science fiction film had a mid-range budget for the time, coming in at around $60 million. In the mid-2000s, that was still a big bet. The film, written by Phil Hay and Matt Manfredi, was based on Peter Chung's boundary-breaking animated MTV science fiction series Aeon Flux, where the titular hero fights against a futuristic and psychedelic dystopia. The show was bold, brutal, and innovative. Its storytelling techniques were, to put it mildly, out there. The film adopted the strangeness of the series, but married it to a more traditional Hollywood narrative. Charlize Theron played Aeon, and a stellar supporting cast, including Sophie Okonedo, Johnny Lee Miller, Frances McDormand, and many others, added to the rich science fiction tapestry.
Found you.
The directing gig was a major opportunity for the young Kusama. Very few women had at the time been given such a budget. Directing was, and to a somewhat lesser extent still is, almost exclusively a man's game in big-budget Hollywood. This is especially true when it comes to big-budget genre films. Prior to recent superhero films like Wonder Woman, Black Widow, and Captain Marvel, almost no big-budget genre films were directed by women. Kathryn Bigelow, who directed both the criminally underseen cyberpunk thriller Strange Days and the hypnotic vampire film Near Dark, was one of the few exceptions. Despite the checkered history of Hollywood's past, Kusama had broken through the glass ceiling. She had been given a chance, but things would not go smoothly. As she later stated, she had probably created too much of an art film. The executives didn't understand it, and worse, didn't think they could sell it. Aeon Flux was taken away from her. About 30 minutes of footage was cut, leaving the film at a trim 92 minutes including credits. When Aeon Flux came out, it was both a major critical failure and a commercial flop. I had the lonely feeling that I was pretty much the only audience member to really truly like it. In fact, I found the picture damn interesting. Mostly because it dared to be different and it dared to be strange. Yes, the film is very peculiar, but so is the MTV source material. Sometimes cult stories like Aeon Flux and before it Tank Girl, directed by Rachel Talalay, won't connect with a mainstream audience. But given time and a chance for discovery, there's a cult audience out there that will greatly appreciate them.
What?
So why did I like it? It wasn't just style and craft and production design. The film had a sense of spirit. It dealt with the cool conceit of multi-generational cloning. But storytelling-wise, it was interested in the human beings trapped in this system. The characters are haunted. Aeon at one point says they are basically ghosts. But as artificial as the society is, and as strangely intentionally artificial as Kusama portrays it, the characters are haunted by their humanity. The film only occasionally lets us see the humans trapped beneath, but then, when we see the humanity pop out in this peculiar alien world, it is powerful. Most critics considered this a flaw and a byproduct of style over substance. I deeply disagree. I think it is clever, subversive, and interesting. It works because these flashes of humanity are potently rendered, and it reveals an unspoken layer of storytelling below the effects and production design, a layer that works as a metaphor for the world the characters lost generations ago. Around the same time Aeon Flux came out and flopped, I was a student, doing my master's degree at the University of Southern California Film School. A great thing about that school is that you're entrenched in Hollywood, and you get access to cool stuff. A bunch of us had gotten hold of a thriller script that was at the time in development, and we were discussing it. Someone, a person already working in the industry, asked who we'd all choose to direct. I answered, Karyn Kusama. The look on her face was one of stunned shock, and she asked, why her? The script was fairly macho, but that never stopped Catherine Bigelow, so I hadn't expected the question. Men direct feminine films all the time, so why couldn't women direct masculine films? The only answer I could think to give was that I found Kusama interesting, and I thought she could do something compelling with the script. We agreed to disagree, and moved on. Kusama also moved on, landing a gig directing Jennifer's Body. The feminist horror film had a lot of hype, as it was screenwriter Diablo Cody's follow-up to the wildly successful Juno. Kusama was considered lucky to land the hot gig, given the critical and financial beating Aeon Flux took. It was a chance for a comeback. Jennifer's Body follows popular high school cheerleader Jennifer and her awkward childhood friend Needy. Jennifer becomes possessed and changes into something of a modern-day succubus. Needy, who has a crush on her friend, ends up facing off with a wild, sexual, dangerous entity. Jennifer's Body is a commentary on sexuality, femininity, and objectification. It alienated a lot of audiences and critics, but it is currently having a renaissance as a major and important modern cult film. In many ways, Jennifer's Body's subversive nature doomed it. The questions it asked about sex and sexuality and objectification were raw and in your face. To put it bluntly, the film wasn't polite. And it featured a monster that fought against a form of repression, sexual and societal. Jennifer's Body wasn't the first female-centric horror film that unapologetically took a feminine point of view, but it certainly sought to bolster this perspective, to bring it to the next level, and to force audiences to view this theme from a new and modern vantage point.
I am going to eat your soul and shit it out, Nicky!
Thought you only murdered boys.
I go both ways.
Alas, when it was released in 2009, Jennifer's Body was considered a disappointment. Kusama had directed a strange and interesting movie, from a strange and interesting screenwriter. Yet unlike the wildly successful Juno, Jennifer's Body failed at the box office.
No way.
But as we've seen during the film's cult revival, many horror fans would argue that Jennifer's Body didn't fail as a movie. Even though Kusama went through some hard knocks during this production, and even if she didn't get to do everything she wanted, Jennifer's Body, like her two previous movies, clearly had the Kusama directorial touch. Fed up with the lack of creative control, Kusama reteamed with Aeon Flux writing duo Phil Hay, who was now also Kusama's husband, and Matt Manfredi. They wanted to make a film without studio interference. With funding from Game Changer Films, a financing entity that specializes in movies directed by women, the trio went to work. The result was the deeply unpleasant horror thriller The Invitation. The story follows a couple, Will and Kira, who are invited to a dinner party at a swanky Hollywood Hills home. The host is Will's ex-wife and her new beau, David. Will, still in mourning over the child he and his ex lost, is deeply reluctant to go, but he does go. As the night continues on, it becomes very clear that something is off, and Will becomes increasingly unsettled. Things eventually go absolutely sideways. Will is like both Aeon and Jennifer. He is a character locked in the fight of his life. He is forced to confront his past, and also forced to confront a society that doesn't understand him, here represented in a microcosm of the other party guests, who all seem to believe he is dealing with grief, and that his legitimate fears can thus be dismissed. No need to listen to him.
You ruined it! You ruined everything! Oh my God!
The indie film was, finally, a substantial critical success. Sure, it didn't make much at the box office, but the relentlessly unpleasant tone and the unnerving subject matter kept the horror thriller in the indie realm. What was certain was that like every previous film Kusama directed, it had a singular directorial touch, and it was imbued with the same fighter spirit seen in Kusama's previous works. In short, the invitation was damned interesting. Kusama would go on to direct a lot of television, and she made the Nicole Kidman thriller Destroyer, also written by Hay and Manfredi. While not a horror film, Destroyer deserves a mention. It is a moody neo-noir with a relentlessly intense Nicole Kidman in the lead, playing a character who is entirely broken, but who keeps fighting despite a lifetime of hard knocks and brutal outcomes to bad decisions. Sadly, commercial success eluded the director yet again, but Kusama has shown herself to be relentless. She's not going away. Karyn Kusama remains a director with a singular voice, and while she hasn't made many films, only 2 of which belong to the horror genre, I'd still consider her a horror director. Horror cinema is a genre of subversive filmmakers, so Kusama definitely belongs in the category. While Hollywood is a fickle place, and many films die in development, Kusama has again been invited to make a horror picture. This time, it is by Universal Pictures and Blumhouse, who hired her to develop a modern-day take on Dracula. If produced, the new Dracula would give her a 3rd horror picture. Now, there's a legitimate question, do we need a new Dracula film? But I refer you to my 2nd ever episode of this series, where I conclude that Dracula is a man for all ages, a monster that reflects whatever era in which his films are produced, and I can't wait to see what Kusama does with the character. Sadly, somewhere out there, in the deep dark trenches of the internet, someone will inevitably ask another question. Why her? They'll argue that she's had a career with several ups and downs critically speaking, and no real major box office hits. And she has a reputation for doing things her own way. The nerve. Why would you want a director who knows what she wants to do and then sticks to her guns? No matter, Universal and Blumhouse didn't care about such silly questions when they hired her. They chose Karyn Kusama for the job, for one reason. Because she is interesting. This is History of Horror. If you liked the episode, I'd sure appreciate it if you liked, shared, and subscribed. Also, if you want to check out some of my other works, I'm an author. My science fiction novel God of Desolation is currently available on Amazon, and my upcoming urban fantasy mystery novel Richly Drawn will be available from Inkshares.com in 2022. Thanks aplenty.